Hi, I'm Sean Munger. I'm That History Guy, and I teach history courses online. This is another in the Thoughts series where I'm going to talk about the process of doing history in general from time to time. I want to talk today about a subject that invariably comes up whenever you do history, particularly ancient history. On this channel, I do some stuff related to Byzantium, the Byzantine Places series, which starts in late antiquity, what we call late antiquity, the end of the ancient world. But I guarantee that if you do anything involving ancient Egypt or Mesoamerica or something along those lines, you would encounter the ancient aliens stuff. When I was teaching a university course on the history of climate change, there was a brief section where we were studying the Mayan civilization. The classical Maya civilization collapsed, arguably, as a result of climatic changes during the medieval warm period. So we were doing this unit, and a student spoke up and said something like, well, isn't there evidence that the Mayans had contact with extraterrestrials? Well, the short answer is no, there isn't. Now, in this video, I'm not going to debate whether or not there is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. Personally, I happen to believe there is. The mathematical odds certainly favor it, but that's not the point of ancient aliens. The question there is whether extraterrestrials have visited Earth or been in contact with human beings in the past, and there is no evidence whatsoever that that has ever happened. Ancient aliens is a form of what we call pseudo-history. And pseudo-history is the process of constructing a false narrative about the past, whether deliberately false or innocently mistaken, but the process of constructing a false narrative through methods that are not historically sound. When historians look at the past, we look largely at primary sources. Not always, but usually, good history is based on primary sources. These are pieces of evidence, whether documents or photos, archaeological evidence, oral history, whatever. But basically pieces of evidence from the time that we're talking about, and which tell us what happened in the past. A soldier who took part in the Battle of Waterloo, for example, in 1815, might have written down his story of what happened to him in that battle. That would be a primary source. When we get to the distant past, ancient civilization, truly ancient civilizations, or civilizations whose written records are unintelligible to us, the Mayans, for example, we have not figured out all of their language. We can read some of it, but not all of it. Anyway, when we talk about these ancient civilizations, we have fewer sources to go on. Often religious beliefs, myths, or legends have been passed down from antiquity, and often those are the primary sources that we have. What pseudo-historians often do, however, is not to look at an ancient culture's myths and legends and try to see what they tell us, but they'll try to interpret them consistently with a predetermined outcome. The idea that gods came down from the skies and taught ancient peoples things like agriculture or building methods, that sort of thing, that's interpreting ancient sources from a predetermined idea, the idea that the gods we're talking about must have been extraterrestrials or UFOs. I'll give you a famous example of how pseudo-history works outside the ancient aliens context. In 1950, a man named Immanuel Velikovsky wrote a book called Worlds in Collision, in which he argued that in the 7th and 8th centuries BC, the planet Mars passed very close to Earth, and various gravitational effects caused a whole bunch of upheavals and calamities in ancient societies. Now, Velikovsky got there with very stretched and forced interpretations of ancient mythology and fragments of ancient history, but his methods were not intellectually sound. He did not examine these myths and ask himself, what do they tell us? Instead, he looked at them and used them to try to find evidence for his worlds in collision theory. Now, pseudo-history is usually very popular. Worlds in Collision sold millions of copies. It has never been out of print in over 60 years. People like pseudo-history in part because it usually involves telling academic experts that they're wrong. Everybody loves to tell academics that they're wrong. It's just a fact of nature. Another form Another common focus of ancient aliens, the hypothesis, centers around monumental architecture, the pyramids, for instance. The argument goes, we have no idea how the pyramids were constructed, therefore there was no way the ancient Egyptians could have done it, so aliens must have helped them. Well, this argument is wrong on a number of levels. First, we happen to know a great deal about how the pyramids were constructed. The archaeological evidence for their construction is pretty well established. However, if there are gaps in the historical record, and there are, or questions like did they drag the stones up big ramps, or did they use a pulley system, or whatever, saying we aren't sure how they did it is not the same thing as saying there's no way they possess the technology to do it, which is the finish line that the ancient aliens people want us to get to. Ancient peoples were in fact every bit as smart and clever as we are today. The fact that they didn't have iPhones or airplanes says nothing about their intelligence or their capabilities. It's just that they had a different set of scientific and technological tools at their disposal than we have today. It is totally incorrect to assume that because a previous culture did not possess the exact technology that we have today, that they were therefore incapable of doing X, Y, and Z, or that this piece or that piece of monumental architecture could only have been built with technology more advanced than that, what they possessed. I'll give you another example. Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Constantinople. This great Byzantine cathedral has survived centuries of earthquakes that left many other structures in ruins. Why? In 2002, this century, researchers discovered that Hagia Sophia, which was constructed between 532 and 537 AD, or CE, they discovered that Hagia Sophia was built with a kind of super concrete that experts are still trying to study and understand. It was able to withstand the seismic stresses greater than other buildings. We don't know exactly what went into that concrete, but we do know that they did it somehow because we have all kinds of historical records to prove who built Hagia Sophia. We know the names of the architects, and we have significant records of the building's construction. So while the mystery of what's in the concrete, that mystery exists, it's technically accurate to say we don't know how they did it. But that totally is different than the conclusion of they couldn't have done it. We know they did it. The historical records are very clear on that. We just don't know every detail about how they did it, but that doesn't mean that they didn't or that they could not have. Furthermore, if aliens did help ancient cultures do various things, why didn't their historical records say so explicitly? We can read, for example, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. How come an Egyptian pharaoh didn't write on a stone somewhere, today a flying saucer landed and these little guys got out and told us how to build pyramids? Why be so cagey about it? Why wouldn't the sources simply disclose what had happened, beyond all doubt? Here's another point. Most ancient aliens hypotheses focus on stuff that was built in the distant past. Ask this question. If aliens helped ancient cultures build things in the past, how come they haven't helped us build things in modern times? Why didn't extraterrestrials land in New York City in 1931 and help us build the Empire State Building, for example? Why aren't there ancient aliens theories about the construction of Mount Rushmore, for instance, which was built in the 1940s? Answer, because we know how these things were built, and we know who built them. The records are very, very clear. If you're talking about the pyramids built thousands of years ago, you have a much easier job of finding gaps in which to fill the historical record with the fantasy of aliens. If you want to put aliens down in Midtown Manhattan in 1931, however, you'd better be willing to explain why they never ended up on the front page of the New York Times. Here's something that many people don't know. Almost all of our modern ancient aliens nonsense comes from a single source, and no, it's not the History Channel documentary. It's from a book called Chariots of the Gods with a question mark at the end of the title. That book was written in 1968 by a fellow called Erich von Däniken. Not a historian, not an archaeologist. Indeed, he's a lot like Velikovsky. He argued that various monumental structures, including the Nazca lines in Peru, had to have been constructed with the help of aliens. Because why? Survey says ancient cultures couldn't have built what they built. The same old untenable arguments that we saw before. That's the entire basis of the theory. Chariots of the Gods is a very convenient question mark I said at the end of that title. Chariots of the Gods has never been out of print in the 50 years that it's existed. Not because it's good history, it's terrible history, but because it tells a good story, and a story that is much more entertaining than the real history of how real human beings in the past built things like the pyramids or the Nazca lines. So in short, although Ancient Aliens makes a fun story, it's very bad history. Fake history, in fact. Historians really do have sound reasons for coming to the conclusions that they come to. History's not a game of telephone. Be careful not to misconstrue sources from the past to support untenable conclusions. This is the mistake that all pseudo-historians make. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.